Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at something that you sent us about loving Jesus. It's sparked some really interesting thoughts, for me at least, about how our love for him is connected to our understanding of ourselves, specifically as sinners forgiven by grace.
It's a fascinating perspective. We often think of spiritual growth as this upward climb towards some kind of, perfection. But this material really challenges us to consider that our love for Jesus might actually deepen the more we grasp the depth of our own brokenness.
Okay, so let's dive into that. You mentioned this idea of love being connected to our understanding of ourselves as sinners. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it's about recognizing that our love for Jesus isn't based on how good we are, but rather on how deeply we understand our need for his forgiveness. The source uses this powerful image of a debt being wiped clean. The bigger the debt, the greater the relief and gratitude when it's forgiven.
That makes me think of the parable in Luke 7 with the woman who washes Jesus' feet with her tears.
Exactly. Jesus points out that her extravagant act of love was directly proportional to the amount she had been forgiven. It wasn't about her being more spiritual than others. It was about her deep understanding of her own sinfulness and the overwhelming grace she had received.
So it's not about comparing ourselves to others and saying, well, I'm not as bad as that person, so I don't need as much forgiveness. It's about recognizing that we're all sinners in need of grace.
Precisely. The more we try to downplay our own flaws or measure ourselves against others, the less we appreciate the magnitude of what Jesus has done for us. And that, in turn, can actually hinder our love for him.
Because if we don't fully grasp our need for forgiveness,
Yeah.
we can't fully appreciate the gift of it.
Exactly. It's like someone handing you $1,000,000, but you're so focused on the $5 you already have that you don't even realize the magnitude of their gift.
So how do we move away from that kind of comparison and self-righteousness? The source mentions embracing our identity as sinners. What does that look like practically?
Well, it starts with honesty, We need to stop pretending we've got it all together and just be willing to acknowledge our shortcomings. Romans 3.23 puts it bluntly, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." It's a universal truth.
But acknowledging our flaws can be tough. No one likes to admit they're wrong or messed up.
It is humbling, but that's precisely the point. The more we humble ourselves and acknowledge our need for God's grace, the more we open ourselves up to experiencing the fullness of his love.
And that's where the transformative power of forgiveness comes in, right?
Hmm.
It's not just about feeling better, it's about changing our hearts and minds.
It's about realizing that our identity isn't found in our achievements or our moral performance, but in the fact that we are loved and forgiven by God. That's a radical shift in perspective for a lot of us.
So you're saying that the more we understand our own brokenness, the more we appreciate the magnitude of God's grace, and the more our love for him deepens.
Exactly. It's like the deeper the valley, the higher the mountain appears. Our sinfulness, when viewed in light of God's infinite grace, becomes the very thing that magnifies his love and draws us closer to him.
That's a powerful image. But I think a lot of people might struggle with the idea that the more sinful we are, the more we could potentially love Jesus. It seems counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? But think about it this way. If someone gives you a small gift, you're grateful. But if someone rescues you from a life-threatening situation, the depth of your gratitude is going to be exponentially greater.
Because the gift is that much more significant.
Exactly. And that's what God's grace is like. It's not just a small token of his affection. It's a complete rescue from the consequences of our sin. The more we understand the gravity of the situation we've been saved from, the more we can grasp the immensity of his love and sacrifice.
So then, is it ever appropriate to say that we love Jesus more than someone else? Because it sounds like we're saying the person who has been forgiven more might love him more deeply.
That's a really important question. And I think the key here is to remember that we can never truly compare our love for Jesus with someone else's. We don't see their hearts or know the depth of their relationship with him.
It's like trying to measure the ocean with a teaspoon.
Exactly. Our focus should always be on our own relationship with Jesus. And the source emphasizes that true love is rooted in humility. The more we understand our own need for grace, the less likely we are to boast about our love for God or compare ourselves to others.
It reminds me of the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. The Pharisee boasted about his own righteousness, while the tax collector simply pleaded for God's mercy.
And Jesus said that it was the tax collector who went home justified before God. His humility, his awareness of his own sinfulness was the foundation of his relationship with God.
So it's not about saying, I love Jesus more than you do, but rather, I am deeply aware of my own need for his forgiveness, and that awareness fuels my love for him.
Yes, and I think that's a much healthier and more authentic approach to spiritual growth. It's not about striving for some kind of spiritual superiority, but about constantly coming back to the foot of the cross, acknowledging our need for grace, and allowing that grace to transform us from the inside out.
It's a beautiful paradox. The more we embrace our weakness, the more we experience His strength. The more we acknowledge our brokenness, the more we're filled with His wholeness.
It's a process, for sure, but it's a process that leads us to a deeper, more authentic love for Jesus. A love that's rooted not in our own goodness, but in the infinite grace we've received.
So if our love for Jesus is fueled by our understanding of our need for forgiveness, how does that understanding actually change the way we live? The source mentions that this kind of love should have a real impact on our actions.
It's not just about having warm feelings for Jesus, it's about allowing that love to shape our thoughts, our words, and our actions.
So how does it manifest in our everyday lives? What does love in action actually look like?
Well, think about it this way. When someone has been truly gracious and forgiving towards us, it naturally motivates us to extend that same grace to others.
So if we've experienced the radical forgiveness of God, we're more likely to forgive those who've wronged us.
Exactly. We start to see ourselves and others through the lens of grace. Recognizing that everyone is fighting their own battles and in need of compassion, we become less judgmental and more understanding.
And I imagine that extends beyond just forgiveness to other acts of love and service.
Absolutely. It spills over into all areas of our lives. We're more patient with difficult people, more generous with our time and resources, more willing to step outside of our comfort zones to help those in need.
Because we've experienced that kind of unconditional love ourselves, we want to share it with others.
Precisely. It's like a chain reaction of grace. Powered by the initial act of God's love for us, we become conduits of that same love, extending it to those around us.
So ultimately, this understanding of love is about so much more than just feeling good about Jesus. It's about allowing that love to transform us from the inside out, and then letting that transformation overflow into the world around us.
Beautifully said. And that's the truly remarkable thing about God's grace. It doesn't just stop with us. It has the power to change the world one act of love at a time.
That's incredible. So much to think about. It seems like this whole idea of love being rooted in our understanding of forgiveness really flips the script on how we typically approach faith.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's not about striving to be good enough or earning God's favor. It's about recognizing our need for grace and allowing that grace to transform us from the inside out.
It's almost like a paradox. The more we acknowledge our weakness, the more we experience His strength.
Exactly. The more we embrace our brokenness, the more we're filled with His wholeness. It's a powerful reminder that true love isn't about performance, it's about surrender. Surrender to the one who loves us unconditionally, flaws and all.
So to wrap up, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listener today?
I think the key is to really reflect on this idea that our love for Jesus is directly tied to our understanding of our own need for forgiveness. It's not about comparing ourselves to others or striving for some unattainable standard of spirituality. It's about humility, gratitude, and surrender.
It's about allowing ourselves to be loved, imperfections, and all the length, and then letting that love flow outwards, transforming our lives and the world around us.
Exactly. It's a journey of continuous growth and discovery, and it all starts with embracing the truth of who we are sinners, saved by grace.
Wow, what an insightful conversation. It's given me a whole new perspective on what it means to love Jesus. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring.